Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku held the power to control time itself. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for Izuku Midoriya, had always been a step out of sync. It was a subtle, pervasive wrongness, a constant stutter in the rhythm of reality that only he seemed to feel. For 14 years, it had been the defining, miserable truth of his existence. It manifested in small, humiliating ways. A pen that would be in his hand one moment, and clattering on the floor the next, the intervening motion a complete blank in his perception. A step that would land a foot further than intended, sending him sprawling on the pavement. Words that would come out in a jumbled rush, as if his mouth had skipped ahead of his brain. The quirk doctors had called it synaptic lag. A minor, inconvenient quirk that caused a fractional delay between his brain's intent and his body's action, often followed by a jarring overcorrection. It was, in their professional opinion, utterly useless for hero work. A clumsy quirk for a clumsy boy. His classmates had a simpler, crueler name for it. Watch it, glitch. Katsuki Bakugo's voice was a percussive blast, as sharp and explosive as the quirk that danced in his palms. Izuku had been trying to pick up his notebook, the one chart around the edges from Bakugo's earlier ministrations, and his hand had jittered, phasing for a split second and knocking over an empty drink can on a nearby desk. The metallic clatter was enough to draw the entire classroom's attention. Can't even pick up your creepy stalker journal without tripping over yourself, another boy with elongated fingers snickered. Izuku's face burned with a familiar shame. Sorry, Kaken, he mumbled, finally getting his fingers to close around the notebook. The cover was still warm. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. His sanctuary? Bakugo scoffed, a plume of smoke curling from his fist. Just stay out of my way, Deku. Your glitching is annoying. He turned and stalked out of the classroom, his two lackeys trailing behind like pilot fish. The word glitch was a nail driven into his soul. It was the perfect descriptor for the feeling. It wasn't a smooth clumsiness. It was a skip, a jump cut in the film of his life. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he would lie awake and focus on the feeling. It was a strange thrumming under his skin, a low-grade hum of potential energy that had nowhere to go. Sometimes, just before a glitch, the world would seem to go quiet for a fraction of a second, the ambient noise of the city, the hum of the refrigerator, all of it would just cease. Then, the jolt, the stumble, the dropped object, and reality would come crashing back in. He had tried to explain this to the doctors, to his mother, to anyone who would listen. They all gave him the same pitying look. It's just part of your quirk, sweetie. You just have to be a little more careful. Careful. He was the most careful person he knew. He had to be. He compensated for his faulty body with a hypervigilant mind. While other kids were learning to control their flashy, powerful quirks, Izuku was learning to predict the unpredictable nature of his own body. He planned every step, every movement, with a meticulousness that bordered on obsessive, and he poured the rest of that analytical energy into his notebooks. Back in the safety of his bedroom, surrounded by the smiling, powerful visages of his all-might posters, Izuku opened his notebook. The smell of burnt paper filled his nostrils, but he ignored it. He turned to a fresh page, clicked his pen, and began to write. Hero Debut, Kamui Woods, Quirk Arbor. Allows for generation and control of wood from his own body. Highly versatile, offense, lacquer chain prison, defense, wooden shields, and mobility, swinging/grappling. Weakness seems to be related to scale. Can be overwhelmed by large-scale destruction. Also, presumably, a vulnerability to fire? Need to research villain matchups. This was his real strength. His mind. His ability to deconstruct a fight, to see the angles and weaknesses that others missed. He couldn't throw a punch without the risk of his fist glitching and missing its target by a foot, but he could tell you exactly where a hero needed to strike to disable a villain with minimal collateral damage. It was this belief, this tiny, flickering ember of hope, that kept his dream alive. If he couldn't be a hero with his fists, maybe he could be one with his brain. He spent the rest of the afternoon engrossed, the world outside his window fading away. The familiar rhythm of analysis, theory, and frantic sketching was a balm to his bruised ego. Here, in these pages, he wasn't Glitchku. He was a strategist. A future hero. The afternoon sun began to dip below the skyline, casting long shadows across his room, when he finally packed his bag to head home. He took a shortcut, his mind still buzzing with quirk theory. He was so lost in thought that he barely registered the ominous chill of the underpass until it was too late. The sound was a wet, gurgling slosh, and the smell hit him like a physical blow, raw sewage and decay. A monstrous, shifting form of green sludge poured out from a manhole cover, two malevolent yellow eyes fixing on him. A medium-sized invisibility cloak, the creature gurgled, its voice a sickening liquid rasp. Panic, cold and absolute, seized Izuku. His feet, for once, did exactly what his brain screamed at them to do, they ran. But he didn't get 2 steps before a tendril of slime shot out, wrapping around his ankle. His body jerked to a halt, the sudden stop causing a violent glitch. For a terrifying half-second, he felt a strange temporal lurch, a feeling of being pulled in 2 different directions at once. The sludge villain seemed to pause, its form wavering slightly, as if confused by the sensation. But the pause was momentary. Izuku was dragged back, screaming, as the foul substance began to force its way into his mouth and nose. It was suffocating, a liquid nightmare filling his lungs. His struggles were useless. His limbs flailed, but the sludge was too strong, too fluid. As his vision began to tunnel, a single, devastating thought burned through the terror. Is this it? Is this how I die? So uselessly? Then, a thunderous voice boomed through the underpass. Have no fear, for I am here. The manhole cover shot into the air like a cannonball. A mountain of muscle and optimism in human form landed with a ground-shaking thud. All Might. In the flesh. Texas smash. The wind pressure was like a physical wall. The sludge villain was blasted apart, splattering against the concrete walls of the underpass. Izuku fell to the ground, coughing and retching, gasping for the clean, precious air. His lungs burned, but he was alive. The minutes that followed were a blur of shock and starstruck awe. All Might, his idol, the symbol of peace, was gathering the villain's remains into a soda bottle. He even signed Izuku's charred notebook. It was the greatest moment of Izuku's life, but a desperate question clawed at his throat. The question that had defined his entire existence. As All Might prepared to leave, Izuku did something reckless. He latched onto the hero's leg just as he jumped. The flight was terrifying, the wind whipping at him, but he held on. They landed on a nearby rooftop, and the question finally spilled out, a torrent of 14 years of hope and despair. Even without a powerful quirk, even with my useless, glitchy quirk, can I still be a hero like you? All Might's response was not what he wanted to hear. The hero deflated, literally, into a skeletal, haggard man before his very eyes, revealing a gruesome injury and a terrible secret. He explained the limits of his power, the reality of the hero world. And then he delivered the final, crushing blow. Pros are always risking their lives, the hero said, his voice gentle but firm. So no, I honestly don't think you can be a hero without a quirk, he misheard. No, he didn't mishear. All Might saw his glitchy quirk and equated it with being quirkless. It was just as useless, just as much of a liability. The words echoed in the cavernous, empty space that had just opened up in Izuku's chest. The rooftop door clicked shut, leaving him alone with the shattered fragments of his dream. He stood there for a long time, the city noise a dull roar in his ears, his personal world utterly silent. It was on his numb, aimless walk home that he saw the crowd. An explosion rocked the street, sending people screaming. Smoke billowed from a shopping district. A villain attack. Drawn by a morbid, self-destructive curiosity, he pushed his way to the front, and his blood ran cold. It was the sludge villain. It had escaped. And it had a hostage. Trapped in the swirling, suffocating mass of green was a familiar figure, blonde spiky hair thrashing, red eyes wide with a terror Izuku had never seen in them before. Explosions burst from the sludge, but they were muffled, useless, only serving to set the surrounding buildings on fire. It was Kaken. The pro-heroes were there, Kamui Woods, Death Arms, Backdraft, but they were helpless. Death Arms was too slow, Kamui was vulnerable to the fire, and Backdraft was focused on crowd control. They were all waiting for someone with the right quirk. Izuku watched, frozen. His mind, his greatest asset, was screaming at him. He saw it all. He saw the villain's eyes, the only solid part of its body. He saw Bakugo's desperate, panicked explosions, using up the oxygen in his prison, bringing him closer to suffocation. He saw the hero's hesitation. His analytical brain processed the scene with horrifying clarity. They're not doing anything. And then, his eyes met Bakugo's. For a split second, through the sludge and smoke, their gazes locked. And in Bakugo's eyes, Izuku saw it. Not arrogance. Not anger. Just pure, unadulterated fear. A plea for help. In that moment, Izuku Midoriya's 14 years of programming, of being told he was useless, of being careful, of staying on the sidelines, shattered into a million pieces. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just moved. His legs, which had been rooted to the spot, pumped furiously. He burst through the police line, a green blur of motion. The heroes shouted after him. "Hey, kid! Stop! It's suicide!" Their voices were distant, distorted. The only thing that mattered was the fear in Kaken's eyes. The world narrowed to a tunnel. Adrenaline surged through him, a white-hot current. The familiar thrumming under his skin intensified, building from a low hum to a deafening roar in his ears. The stress, the terror, the desperate, all-consuming need to save someone, it was a crucible, forging something new and terrifying within him. He ran, his backpack slipping from his shoulders. He swung it, aiming for the villain's eye. A desperate, childish move. The bag struck true, startling the villain for a barest fraction of a second. It was enough. He reached the swirling vortex of sludge, his hands clawing at the filth, trying to get a grip, trying to pull his childhood friend, his tormentor, his rival, free. "Kaken!" he screamed, his voice raw. "What the hell are you doing here, Deku?" Bakugo snarled, his voice weak and strained. "I don't know," Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the grime. "My legs, they just started moving. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die." The sludge villain recovered, its liquid form rising like a tidal wave, ready to crush this insignificant gnat. "You're next!" it roared. Bakugo's struggles were weakening. His eyes were starting to glaze over. He was losing consciousness. No. No, 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 no! The word was a silent scream in Izuku's soul. It was a primal, absolute rejection of the reality unfolding before him. It was more than a wish, more than a prayer. It was a command, and for the first time in his life, reality obeyed. It began with the sound. Or rather, the lack of it. One moment, the world was a cacophony, the roar of flames, the crackle of Bakugo's explosions, the screams of the crowd, the villain's gurgling threats. The next, there was only in profound, impossible silence. It was so absolute it was a physical pressure against his eardrums. Then came the sight. The giant descending fist of sludge, mere inches from his head, stopped. It didn't slow down, it simply ceased all motion, hanging in the air like a poorly rendered special effect. The flames licking the side of a storefront froze, each lick of fire a perfect, crystalline sculpture of orange and yellow. A drop of sweat, flying from Death Arm's brow, was suspended in the air, a tiny, perfect sphere. The expressions of the crowd were locked in a gallery of horror, mouths agape, eyes wide, a single tear frozen on a woman's cheek. The world had become a photograph. A three-dimensional, life-size diorama of a single, terrible moment. And in the center of it all, Izuku Midoriya stood, breathing, his heart hammered against his ribs, the only sound in this dead world. He looked at his hands, expecting them to be trembling, but they were steady. The low-grade hum that had plagued him his entire life was gone, replaced by a feeling of immense, terrifying power, a quiet thrum of absolute control that resonated from the marrow of his bones, terror warred with a dizzying sense of wonder. He took a hesitant step. His foot landed on the asphalt with a soft, solitary scuff. Nothing else moved. He was the only living, moving thing in a frozen universe. He looked at the sludge villain. Its form was static, a grotesque statue of green slime. Bakugo was trapped within, his face a mask of straining agony. A single bubble of air paused at his lips. He wasn't suffocating anymore. He wasn't in pain. He was just paused. A wave of clarity, sharp and cold, washed over Izuku. The panic receded, replaced by a focused, analytical calm he usually only found when writing in his notebooks. There was no danger. There was no pressure. There was only the problem, and the solution. He walked forward, his footsteps the only percussion in a silent orchestra. He reached the frozen villain and, without fear or hesitation, plunged his arms into the unmoving sludge. It had the consistency of thick, cold gelatin. It didn't resist. It couldn't. He pushed and pulled, his movements deliberate, carving a path through the static monster. He reached Bakugo, his fingers brushing against his school uniform. He gripped Bakugo's arm and pulled. He slid free of the sludge as if being pulled from a mold. He was heavy, an anchor of dead weight in Izuku's arms. Izuku dragged him clear, laying him down on the pavement a safe 10 feet away. He had done it. He had saved him. He looked back at the frozen tableau, at the world held in abeyance by his will. A part of him, a terrified, childish part, wondered if it would ever start again. What if he was trapped here forever, the lonely god of a single, silent moment? The thought sparked a new kind of panic. He didn't want this. He just wanted Kaken to be safe. He wanted the world to be normal again. He closed his eyes and willed it. Start. Reality came back with the force of a physical blow. Boom. The sound was a deafening, instantaneous wall of noise. The explosion, the fire, the screams all hit him at once. The world lurched, motion snapping back into place. The sludge villain's fist, no longer aiming for Izuku, completed its arc and slammed into the empty space where he and Bakugo had been, cratering the asphalt. To everyone else, the sequence of events was utterly impossible. One instant, the scrawny, green-haired kid was about to be obliterated, his hands futilely clawing at the villain. The next, in a flicker so fast it was barely perceptible, less than a blink, less than a heartbeat, he was 10 feet away, and the hostage was lying safely on the ground beside him. It wasn't speed. Speed implies travel, a blur of motion between 2 points. This was different. This was a replacement. An edit. He was there, and then he was here. The pro-heroes stared, their minds struggling to process the visual data. Death Arms, who had been charging forward, stumbled to a halt. Kamui Woods, extending a branch, froze mid-action. They were all staring at Izuku. Before anyone could react, a familiar, booming voice cut through the stunned silence. I really am pathetic. All Might, in his muscle form, landed between Izuku and the now enraged villain. He had been there in the crowd, ashamed of his weakness, his inaction. But the boy's impossible, reckless heroism had spurred him into action. Detroit Smash. With a single, devastating punch, All Might changed the weather. The sludge villain was obliterated, the force of the blow creating a swirling updraft that caused rain to fall from a clear blue sky. The crisis was over. In the aftermath, Izuku was checked over by paramedics, his ears ringing from the violent return of sound. The heroes, once they had regained their composure, scolded him for his recklessness, but their words lacked conviction. Their eyes kept darting towards him, filled with a mixture of confusion and awe. You've got a powerful teleportation quirk there, kid, Death Arms said, shaking his head. But a stunt like that was still idiotic. Izuku just shook his head, unable to form words. Teleportation? No, that's not what it felt like. Bakugo was praised for his bravery, for his powerful quirk. But he wasn't looking at the heroes. He was staring at Izuku, his red eyes narrowed with a burning intensity that was different from his usual anger. It was confusion. Suspicion. And a sliver of something that looked unnervingly like fear. He knew. He was at the epicenter of it. He knew that what Izuku did wasn't normal. Later, as Izuku was walking home, his body aching with a strange, deep-seated exhaustion and a pounding headache radiating from the base of his skull, a voice called out to him. I am here. All Might, in his muscle form, zipped around the corner. To thank you and to discuss, he said, before deflating back into his skeletal form with a gout of steam. Izuku flinched, expecting another lecture. Young man, Toshinori Yagi began, his voice serious, what you did back there was incredibly heroic. You moved before anyone else. You acted when we were all frozen. You reminded me what it truly means to be a hero. Izuku's eyes filled with tears. This was it. The praise, the acknowledgement from his idol. And now, All Might continued, his tone shifting, his gaze becoming sharp, piercing. You're going to tell me the truth. Izuku blinked, confused. The truth? Don't play dumb with me, kid. I've seen every kind of speed quirk there is. I've fought villains who can teleport. What you did back there was either of those things. All Might took a step closer, his sunken eyes filled with an intensity that was more intimidating than his muscle form. I was watching. I was watching every single frame. One moment you were about to be crushed. The explosions were still expanding. The fire was still spreading. The next moment, everything had changed. The villain had already missed. You were already safe. It was as if a page was torn out of the book of reality. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, grim whisper. It wasn't that you were fast, young man. It was that for a second, everything else was stopped. All Might's voice was heavy with the weight of a dawning, terrifying realization. The world stopped. The fire stopped. The explosion stopped. Time itself stopped. Izuku's breath hitched. The blood drained from his face. The secret feeling, the silent moments, the glitches, the impossible event, it all coalesced into a single, horrifying, magnificent truth. All Might straightened up, his expression unreadable. He had come to this rooftop to crush a boy's dream. Then he had come to this street to offer that same boy a chance. But now, he was here for an entirely different reason. He was here because he had just witnessed a power that defied the very laws of the universe. So I'll ask you again, young Midoriya, he said, his voice quiet but echoing with an unimaginable gravity. What is your quirk? The silence that followed All Might's question was a different kind of silence from the one Izuku had just commanded. This was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with unspoken implications and the crushing weight of a life recontextualized. The distant city hummed on, oblivious, but on that rooftop, two worlds had collided, the world Izuku thought he knew, and the impossible truth. What are you talking about? Izuku stammered, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in his mouth. His mind, usually so quick to analyze and categorize, was a maelstrom of denial. I ran fast. Adrenaline. It was, no, All Might, Toshinori interrupted, his voice soft but unyielding. His skeletal frame seemed to cast a shadow far larger than its size. Young man, my quirk is super speed. I know what it looks like. I know what it feels like. There is a blur. There is air displacement. There are signs of passage. With you, there was nothing. You were there, and then you were here. The laws of physics took a holiday. He gestured vaguely back towards the scene of the attack, now swarming with emergency services. I wasn't the only one who saw it. The other pros, the police, they'll call it a teleportation quirk because that's the only word in their vocabulary that comes close. But I felt it. A strange drag? A stillness. Like the world held its breath. Izuku stared at him, his entire body trembling. The events of the past hour replayed in his mind, but this time through a new, terrifying lens. The absolute silence. The frozen tableau. The feeling of moving through a world made of statues. It wasn't a hallucination born of panic. It was real, a memory, long suppressed, surfaced. A rainy day when he was 6. He'd slipped on a wet curb, a nasty fall towards the hard edge of the concrete. But he hadn't hit it. For a strange, silent moment, he'd found himself suspended an inch above the ground, the raindrops around him hanging in the air like tiny glass beads. Then, a jarring lurch, and he was suddenly sitting on the pavement a foot away, scraped and bruised from a fall he couldn't remember happening. His mother had called it a lucky stumble. A glitch. My quirk, Izuku whispered, the sound raw and fragile. They called it synaptic lag. Toshinori listened intently, his gaze never leaving the boy's face. They said it was a delay between my brain and my body. It's why I'm so clumsy. I drop things, I stumble. I glitch. The hated word tasted like ash on his tongue. He explained it all, the dropped pens, the missteps, the moments of perceptual blankness where a fraction of a second would just vanish. He talked about the strange, quiet hum he sometimes felt under his skin, the brief cessation of all sound just before a particularly bad stumble. It was a confession of every humiliation, every failure, every piece of evidence he had spent his life trying to ignore or explain away. Toshinori's expression shifted from grim suspicion to a profound, almost sorrowful understanding. They misdiagnosed you, he said, the words landing with the finality of a judge's gavel. They saw the symptoms, not the cause. It wasn't a lag, young man. It was a misfire. Your body, your mind, has been trying to handle a power it was never designed to contain. Those glitches, they were microactivations. Your quirk hiccuping. Tiny, uncontrolled skips in time, fractions of a second forward or backward, causing your body to be in a place your mind hadn't caught up to yet. He let out a long, weary sigh. A power like that, dormant, would make you seem uncoordinated. It would be a constant battle between your perception of time and your body's physical place within it. No wonder you've struggled. Izuku felt a wave of vertigo so intense he had to grip the rooftop railing to keep from falling. His entire life, every moment of shame, was being rewritten. He wasn't just clumsy. He wasn't a failure. He was something else. Something terrifying. Time. Izuku choked out the word. I can control time? It appears so, Toshinori confirmed. The stress of the villain attack, the desperate need to save your friend, it was the key. It fully awakened what was sleeping inside you. He looked at Izuku, and for the first time, the boy saw a flicker of fear in the hero's eyes. A quirk that can stop the flow of reality itself. In all my years, I have never heard of anything so fundamental, so powerful. He paused, letting the magnitude of it sink in. Let's give it a name worthy of its scale. Not a clinical diagnosis. Something that speaks to its true nature. The moment where all motion ceases. The point where the clock stops. 0 hour. 0 hour. The name echoed in the hollow space inside Izuku's chest. It sounded like the name of a weapon. The name of a doomsday device. Not the quirk of a hero. Tears began to well in Izuku's eyes, hot and thick. But, what does that mean? He asked, his voice cracking. A power like this, it's a monster's power. How can I be a hero with this? All Might, you said I couldn't be a hero without a powerful quirk. Is this what you meant? Toshinori's expression softened. He placed a bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. What I said on that roof earlier. I was a fool. I was speaking from a place of caution and my own limitations. You have proven me wrong. You ran in to save someone, acting on pure instinct. That is the heart of a hero, regardless of the quirk. He took a deep breath, his next words carefully chosen. And that is why I must renew my offer. Izuku looked up, confused. Your offer? My quirk. The one I told you about. The sacred torch passed down from one generation to the next. One for all. But why? Izuku asked, bewildered. I have this. 0 hour. I don't need another quirk. You should give it to someone who... You misunderstand, young man, Toshinori said, his grip tightening slightly. I am not offering you one for all to make you a hero. You already have more power than you know what to do with. I am offering it to you so that your own power doesn't kill you. The statement hung in the air, cold and sharp. Think about what you just did, Toshinori urged. You stopped time. You imposed your will on the entire universe. Do you have any concept of the physical forces involved? The energy required? Your body is a normal human body. It is a fragile container trying to hold the power of a god. The reason you have a splitting headache right now, the reason you feel exhausted down to your very bones, is because of the backlash. Izuku unconsciously touched his temple. The throbbing was still there, a painful, rhythmic reminder. That backlash, the physical toll, is only going to get worse as you learn to use your power more, Toshinori explained, his voice grim. What happens when you try to stop time for 5 seconds? 10? What happens when you try to do something more complex, like rewinding or accelerating time? Your body will be torn apart. Your cells could be ripped from the normal flow of time, aging to dust or regressing to nothing. You need a vessel. A body reinforced with power, strong enough to withstand the strain of bending reality. He looked Izuku dead in the eyes, his conviction absolute. One for All is a quirk that stockpiles immense physical power. It strengthens the user, reinforces every bone, every muscle, every cell. For you, it won't just be a weapon. It will be your shield. Your armor. Your anchor to keep you from being erased by your own incredible gift. I am offering you the chance to survive your own potential. The logic was undeniable, terrifying, and brilliant. Izuku's analytical mind latched onto it. His quirk was the engine of a reactor, and his body was a housing made of glass. One for All was the lead shielding. Without it, the first time he truly revved that engine, he'd face a meltdown. The dream he thought was dead had been reborn, but it was now a far more complicated and dangerous creature. The path to being a hero wasn't just about being strong enough to fight villains. It was about being strong enough to survive himself. With tears streaming down his face, a mixture of terror, relief, and a dawning, awesome sense of purpose, Izuku Midoriya looked at his idol and nodded. I accept. The 10 months that followed were the most grueling, painful, and enlightening of Izuku Midoriya's life. The location for his training was the Goba Municipal Beach Park, a stretch of coastline that had become an illegal dumping ground, choked with decades of rusted appliances and mountains of trash. Heroism these days is about more than just fighting villains. All Might had boomed on their first day, back in his magnificent muscle form. It's about service. So your task is twofold. You will clean this entire beach to train your body, and in doing so, you will perform a great service for this community. The American Dream Plan was punishing. Izuku's schedule was a meticulous hell of diet, exercise, and sleep. He hauled refrigerators, dragged cars, and moved mountains of scrap, his muscles screaming in protest day after day. But this physical training was only half of the equation. The other half was far stranger, and far more dangerous. All right, young Midoriya, Toshinori said one morning, a few weeks into the training. He held up a small, smooth stone. The goal is simple. I am going to drop this stone. I want you to activate 0 hour and stop time for exactly 1 second. Then, release it. Izuku nodded, his expression grim. They had tried this once before, and the result had been a 2-hour migraine and a bloody nose that took 10 minutes to stop. He took a deep breath, focusing on the strange, humming sensation within him. It was no longer a vague background noise but a distinct pool of energy deep in his core, cold and silent. Toshinori released the stone. Instantly Izuku reached for that power, pulling it up and outwards. Stop, the world obeyed. The roar of the nearby ocean became a frozen, silent wave. A seagull, taking flight, was suspended in the air, its wings outstretched. The falling stone hung before him, motionless. The familiar, profound silence descended. But this time, Izuku was ready for it. He felt the immense strain, a pressure building behind his eyes as if his skull was too small for his brain. He held it. He focused, counting in his head with a clarity that only existed in this frozen moment. 1. He released his will. Start. Sound and motion crashed back into existence with the force of a sonic boom. The stone clattered to the ground. Izuku staggered back, a sharp spike of pain lancing through his head. He brought a hand to his nose and felt the warm, wet trickle of blood. Good, Toshinori said, examining a stopwatch. 1.3 seconds. Better. The backlash seems proportional to the duration. We need to get your control more precise. They practiced this day after day. Izuku would try to freeze a falling object, a crashing wave, a gust of wind. The cost was always there, a tax paid in blood and pain. A half-second stop resulted in a dull throb in his temples. A full second brought the nosebleed. Pushing for 2 seconds, which he managed only once, caused blood to leak from the corners of his eyes and left him so dizzy he couldn't stand for nearly an hour. His body was a battery, and every use of 0 hour drained it, leaving him aching and vulnerable. The physical training took on a new urgency. Every pound of muscle he built, every increase in his stamina, was another layer of defense. He wasn't just working to be worthy of One for All. He was clawing for every ounce of strength he needed to wield the power he already had. About 5 months in, when his body was starting to take on a lean, wiry strength, Toshinori decided it was time for the next lesson. Stopping time is one thing, he said, standing beside a precariously balanced tower of old tires. It is a blunt instrument. But a power over time itself should theoretically have more finesse. What happens if you try to alter its flow for a specific object? He pointed to the top tire. Try to rewind that tire's personal timeline by just a few seconds. Make it return to the position it was in before I placed it there. Izuku stared at the tire, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. This felt different. More complex. Stopping time was an act of holding back a river. This felt like trying to make a small part of that river flow upstream. He focused not on the world, but on the single tire. He reached out with his power, trying to isolate it, to wrap his temporal will around it. He didn't want to stop it, he wanted to reverse it, rewind. The sensation was violently unpleasant. It wasn't the clean, cold pressure of a time stop. This was a nauseating, grinding feeling, as if he were fighting against the very fabric of the universe. The world around him seemed to flicker and distort, and a phantom chorus of whispers echoed in his mind. He felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his gut. But it worked. The tire wobbled, then lifted into the air, tracing its previous path in reverse before settling on the stack from which Toshinori had taken it. The moment it settled, Izuku collapsed to his knees, vomiting onto the sand. The world spun around him, a nauseating carousel of color and light. A splitting headache, 10 times worse than any he'd had before, slammed into him. It felt like his brain was being scraped out with a rusty spoon. Young Midoriya! Toshinori was at his side instantly, a canteen of water in his hand. The cost, Izuku gasped, wiping his mouth. It's so much higher. Causality, Toshinori mused, his expression deeply troubled. To stop time is to pause the story. To rewind it is to tear out a page and demand it be unwritten. The universe does not like that. It pushes back. That backlash you're feeling isn't just physical strain. It's the universe correcting the paradox you just created. The implications were staggering. Rewinding time, even on a small scale, was a cosmic taboo. To do so on a larger scale, to try and save someone, to undo a death, the cost would be unimaginable. It might not just destroy him. It could unravel the timeline itself. They never practiced rewinding again. The lesson had been learned. It was a weapon of last resort, a forbidden art he could only use if he was willing to pay the ultimate price. The final months passed in a blur of hauling, lifting, and meticulously controlled practice. Izuku learned to use his time stops with surgical precision. He could freeze time for 1/10 of a second to grant himself a moment of perfect clarity, a tactical pause to analyze a situation. The cost was minimal, a slight dizziness, a faint headache. It became his signature move. He could use these time blinks to anticipate an opponent's move, to find a weakness, to perfectly time his own actions to compensate for his body's natural glitchiness, which had all but disappeared as his control grew. He also experimented, very carefully, with acceleration. By focusing on a piece of scrap metal and pushing its timeline forward, he could cause it to rust and corrode in seconds. The strain was significant, similar to rewinding but less violent, leaving him feeling drained and aged, a deep weariness settling into his bones. Throughout it all, Toshinori was his guide. He was more than a coach, he was a mentor in the truest sense. He taught Izuku about the responsibility that came with power, about the ethics of wielding a force that could rewrite history. Your quirk, young Midoriya, it offers the ultimate temptation, he said one evening, as they watched the sunset over the now pristine beach. The temptation to fix every mistake, to save everyone, to erase all tragedy. But you cannot. You must not. Every change you make, no matter how small, creates ripples. A rescued cat could cause a traffic accident a mile away. You must learn to accept that some things are meant to be. Your role is not to be a god, but to be a hero. To protect the present, not to rewrite the past. Finally, the day of the UA entrance exam arrived. Izuku stood on the clean, beautiful beach, his body transformed. He was no longer a scrawny, clumsy boy. He was lean, strong, and covered in a latticework of scars from his grueling training. He had moved every last piece of trash. All Might stood before him, beaming with pride, his muscle form seeming to shine in the morning sun. Incredible! He boomed. Truly incredible! You did it, my boy! You turned this trash heap back into a paradise. He plucked a single hair from his head. Now, for my part of the bargain. He held it out to the stunned boy. Eat this. Izuku's reaction was exactly what one would expect. Huh! To inherit my power, you have to ingest some of my DNA. That's how it works. All Might insisted, unfazed. Come on. There's no time. The exam starts in 3 hours. Eat. 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 With a profound sense of bewilderment, and a desperate leap of faith, Izuku took the strand of hair and swallowed it. It went down with a tickle, leaving no immediate sensation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, he felt it. It started as a warm glow in his stomach, a stark contrast to the cold, silent well of 0 hour. The glow spread, racing through his veins like liquid sunlight. It was a feeling of boundless energy, of crackling, untamed power. It felt like 1,000 lightning storms contained within his skin. It was vibrant. It was loud. It was life. He could feel the two powers coexisting within him, two titans sharing a single space. 0 hour was the deep, silent, infinite ocean, the power of absolute stillness and control. 1 for all was the raging, chaotic storm on its surface, the power of action and overwhelming force. They were polar opposites, yet he could feel them settling into a strange, volatile harmony. He felt the raw energy of 1 for all reinforcing him, creating a buffer around the cold core of 0 hour. It was just as Tashinori had said. 1 was the power. The other was the shield. How do you feel, young Midoriya? Tashinori asked, a hint of concern in his voice. Izuku looked down at his hands. He flexed his fingers, feeling the hum of latent energy. He was terrified. He was exhilarated. He was, for the first time in his life, whole. I feel, Izuku said, a slow, determined smile spreading across his face as he looked towards the distant silhouette of Uehai, ready. The entrance to Uehai was a monument to hope. Its towering, H-shaped glass buildings pierced the morning sky, reflecting the endless blue of possibility. For the hundreds of aspiring heroes gathered before its gates, it was a gateway to destiny. For Izuku Midoriya, it felt like standing at the foot of a mountain he was uniquely, terrifyingly equipped to climb. He clutched the strap of his backpack, the fabric worn smooth from 10 months of constant use. His body was a tightly coiled spring, thrumming with an energy that was not entirely his own. 1 for all was a furnace in his core, a wild, untamed power that crackled just beneath his skin. He had tried to use it once since receiving it, attempting a simple punch on an old washing machine at the beach. The resulting explosion of force had not only obliterated the appliance but had also turned his arm into a grotesque, purpled spiral of broken bones. Recovery Girl's quirk, which All Might had arranged for in secret, had fixed him, but the lesson was seared into his mind. 1 for all was a nuclear option, a self-destruct button he couldn't press without dire consequences. His true weapon was the other power, the cold, silent ocean of 0 hour that lay dormant beneath the storm of 1 for all. It was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Today would not be a test of overwhelming power, but of absolute precision. Out of my way, Deku. The voice was a familiar explosion of gravel and contempt. Katsuki Bakugo shoved past him, not even bothering to look at him. But there was a difference in his stride, a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. His sideways glance wasn't one of casual dismissal. It was a sharp, probing glare, full of suspicion. Ever since the sludge villain incident, Bakugo had looked at him like he was a puzzle with a missing piece, and it infuriated him. Keikaken! Good luck! Izuku managed, his voice a little steadier than it used to be. Bakugo just scoffed, a tiny, crackling explosion popping in his palm. Don't need luck. Just stay out of my way so your useless glitching doesn't trip me up. The word glitch didn't sting as much as it used to. It was a misdiagnosis, a misunderstanding of the universe. Izuku took a deep breath, steeling himself, and took a step forward, and promptly caught his foot on a raised paving stone. It was a moment of pure, classic Midoriya clumsiness. His body pitched forward, arms windmilling, gravity asserting its mundane authority. For a horrifying second, he thought he was going to faceplant on the first day. But instinct, honed over hundreds of hours of painful practice, took over. Stop. He didn't freeze the whole world. He didn't need to. He triggered a flicker, a time blink so infinitesimally small it was barely 1/100th of a second. But in that frozen slice of a moment, his mind had all the time it needed. He saw his trajectory. He saw his flailing limbs. He calculated the precise shift and balance needed to recover. Start. To an outside observer, it looked like a ridiculously smooth, almost choreographed stumble. He pitched forward, and in a single fluid motion, twisted his body, catching himself in a low crouch, one hand brushing the ground for balance. He sprang back up as if nothing had happened. "Whoa, are you okay?" A girl with a round, friendly face and warm brown eyes was looking at him with concern. She had her hand outstretched, as if she'd been about to use her quirk on him. "That was a close one. It's bad luck to fall on the big day, right?" "Oh. Yeah? I'm fine," Izuku stammered, his face instantly flushing red. "Thanks for the, concern. My name's Ochako Uraraka," she said with a bright, cheerful smile. "This is all so nerve-wracking, isn't it? Good luck in there." She gave him a little wave and hurried on ahead. Izuku watched her go, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. He had just used his quirk, his world-altering power, for something as simple as not falling on his face. And it had worked perfectly. It was a small, quiet victory that meant more to him than she could ever know. The written portion of the exam was a blur of essays and complex equations. Izuku's analytical mind, sharpened by years of quirk analysis and 10 months of tactical training with all might, breezed through it. The real test, the one that truly mattered, was the practical. He found himself in a massive auditorium, the lights dimming as a colossal screen lit up behind a stage. A man with a directional speaker for a neck and a wild blonde pompadour appeared in the spotlight. "Welcome, one and all, to my live show!" he screamed, the volume making the seats vibrate. "Everybody say hey." Silence. "Tough crowd." Present Mike continued undeterred. He launched into a high-speed explanation of the practical exam. They would be sent into massive, simulated cityscapes, battle centers, and would have to fight 3 types of robotic villains, worth 1, 2, and 3 points respectively. Your goal, little listeners, is to rack up as many points as you can by taking these bots down. A blue-haired, athletic-looking boy with glasses shot to his feet, his hand ramrod straight in the air. "Excuse me, sir. A question. Hit me. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains listed, not 3. If this is a misprint, it is a gross error for a prestigious institution such as UA." He then turned, his arm chopping stiffly towards Izuku. "And you, with the curly hair. You have been muttering this entire time. It is distracting. If you are not taking this seriously, then perhaps you should leave." A few people snickered. Izuku shrank in his seat, his face burning. Sorry. All right, examinee 7111. Present Mike placated the serious boy. "Thanks for the call, Ian. The 4th robot type is the 0-pointer. Think of it as a stage gimmick. It's worth 0 points, so your best bet is to just run away. That's all I got for ya. Now I'll leave you with our school motto. Plus ultra. Go beyond." They were herded onto buses and taken to their assigned battle centers. Izuku found himself standing before the towering gates of Battle Center B. The cityscape behind it was vast and intimidating, a concrete and steel jungle where he would either prove his worth or fail spectacularly. Other applicants were stretching, showing off their quirks. A boy with a laser on his stomach, a girl with pink skin creating acid, and the serious boy from the auditorium, who now had strange, engine-like pipes sticking out of his calves. They all radiated power and confidence. Izuku, by contrast, felt like a ghost. His power was invisible, silent. His strategy was one of avoidance and precision, not brute force. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes and feeling for the 2 wells of power within him. The raging fire of One for All, which he had to suppress, and the cold, deep ocean of 0 hour, which he had to command. And begin! Present Mick's voice blared from unseen speakers. The massive gates slid open. While the other applicants hesitated for a moment, confused by the abrupt start, Izuku was already moving. He had learned one thing above all else from All Might: heroes don't wait for a starting gun. He sprinted into the foe's city, his footsteps echoing in the empty streets. The others quickly followed, fanning out in search of points. Izuku's plan was simple: avoid direct confrontation, use the environment, and let the other, more powerful applicants do the heavy lifting, creating chaos he could exploit. He rounded a corner, and came face to face with his first opponent. A one-pointer. It was a squat, green machine on a single tread, its red optical sensor swiveling to focus on him. It lunged, its metallic claws extended. Izuku's heart hammered in his chest, but his mind was ice cold. He didn't dodge. He stood his ground. The robot closed the distance in a second, its claw aiming for his chest. Just as it was about to connect, Izuku blinked. Stop. Time froze for a bare 0.2 seconds. In that frozen moment, the world a silent, gray photograph, he saw everything. The claw was inches from his shirt. But his eyes weren't on the claw. They were on the robot's tread mechanism. An unarmored hydraulic joint, a bundle of exposed red and blue wires connecting the chassis to the motor. A weak point. Start. Reality snapped back. To the robot, no time had passed at all. But Izuku was already moving, acting on the information he'd gained in his private slice of time. He dropped and slid, the claw swiping through the empty air where he'd been. As he slid past, he grabbed a discarded length of rebar from a pile of rubble and, with a powerful, precise thrust, jammed it deep into the exposed joint. Sparks erupted. The robot seized, its sensor flickering wildly before going dark. It listed to one side, immobilized. 1 point. A dull throb started behind his right eye, the familiar cost of his power. He ignored it and kept moving. He could hear explosions and crashes echoing through the city. The other applicants were finding their stride. Izuku ducked into an alleyway, climbing a fire escape to get a better vantage point. From the rooftops, he was a predator. He could see the whole board. He spotted a three-pointer, a towering bipedal machine, cornering another applicant. As it raised its cannon arm, Izuku saw his chance. Further down the street, two two-pointers were rolling towards the same intersection. He took a breath, focusing his will. It was a more complex calculation. He needed a longer pause. Stop. The world froze for a full half-second. The pressure behind his eyes intensified. In this silent moment, he calculated trajectories, speeds, and timing. The three-pointer was firing. The two-pointers were converging. The other applicant was trapped. Start. He didn't attack anything directly. As reality resumed, he simply kicked a loose pile of bricks off the roof's edge. The clatter of bricks hitting the pavement below was just enough. The two-pointers, their simple AI reacting to the sound, altered their course slightly. It was a change of only a few degrees, but it was enough. The three-pointer fired its laser cannon. Its target, the other applicant, had already dived for cover. The laser beam shot across the intersection just as the two-pointers, their paths now altered, rolled directly into its path. The beam sliced through both of them, causing them to explode in a shower of shrapnel and sparks. Izuku felt a flicker of guilt for stealing points, but he quickly suppressed it. This was a test. And he was passing. He became a phantom in the machine. He never fought head-on. He used time blinks to sidestep lunges, causing robots to smash into walls or each other. He used the brief pauses to spot structural weaknesses, exposed panels, and vulnerable wiring he could exploit with debris. He dismantled the two-pointer by using a time blink to perfectly time throwing a metal plate into its exposed gear system, causing it to grind to a halt. He racked up points slowly but surely. 1 here, 2 there. 2. 5. 9. 13. 21 points. Each use of 0 hour added to the pounding in his skull, a dull, rhythmic ache that was becoming harder to ignore. He could feel his focus starting to slip. He was on a clock, and not just the exams. He saw the serious boy with the engine legs, Tenya Ida, zip past, disabling robots with powerful, precise kicks. He saw Uraraka, the nice girl from the entrance, making robots float helplessly by touching them before letting them crash back to the ground. He saw raw power everywhere, and here he was, a scavenger, picking at the seams of reality. A familiar pang of inadequacy hit him, but he forced it down. This was his way of fighting. His way of being a hero. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. It started as a low rumble, vibrating up through the soles of his shoes, and quickly grew into a ground-shaking tremor. Buildings shook, dust and pebbles raining down from their facades. A shadow fell over the street. Izuku looked up, and his blood ran cold. Rising from behind a block of buildings, so massive it blotted out the sun, was the zero-pointer. It was an engine of pointless destruction, a titan of green and black metal that dwarfed the 10-story buildings it was now smashing aside. Its head, a solid block of steel with a single, glowing red camera for an eye, swiveled, surveying the chaos. The other applicants had only one reaction, pure, unadulterated panic. "It's the zero-pointer. Run! It's not worth any points. We can't fight that thing." A stampede began as everyone turned and fled, a mad scramble to get away from the walking natural disaster. Izuku, caught up in the wave of fear, ran with them. His heart hammered against his ribs. All Might's voice echoed in his head, "Your best bet is to just run away." It was the logical choice. The smart choice. There were still smaller robots to find, more points to be had. He was running, putting distance between himself and the mechanical behemoth, when he heard it. A small, pained cry. "Ow!" Izuku skidded to a halt, turning back against the tide of fleeing students. His eyes scanned the rubble-strewn street at the feet of the approaching giant. And he saw her. It was Uraraka. She was trapped, her leg pinned beneath a large slab of concrete, a casualty of the zero-pointer's rampage. She was struggling, trying to push the rock off, but it was too heavy. And the robot's massive, building-sized foot was lifting, preparing to take another step, a step that would crush her into oblivion. In that instant, the points, the exam, the strategic thinking, it all vanished. All that remained was a girl in trouble and a monster about to kill her. The memory of Bakugo's terrified eyes and the grip of the sludge villain flashed in his mind. It was the same feeling. The same absolute, undeniable imperative. A hero saves people. He turned and ran back towards the danger, his mind racing, calculating, discarding plans as fast as he could form them. Option 1: full-time stop. He could freeze everything, walk over, and try to lift the rubble. But the zero-pointer was massive. The sheer temporal mass of it, to freeze something that big, even for a few seconds, the backlash would be immense. It would be like trying to hold back a tsunami with his bare hands. He'd be unconscious, possibly dead, before he could even help her. Too risky. Option 2: use one for all. A single, 100% smash. He could channel it into his arm and punch the robot. But what would that do? It would shatter his arm, rendering him useless. And would a single punch from his untrained body even be enough to stop something that massive? It might just stagger it, and then he'd be a one-armed, crippled target. High risk, uncertain reward. The robot's foot reached the apex of its ascent, and began to descend. He had seconds. The other applicants were gone. The pros were watching, but they wouldn't intervene unless there was a true fatality. This was his test. His alone. He looked at his legs. He looked at the robot's head, stories above the ground. He looked at Uraraka's terrified, upturned face. And a third option, a desperate, insane piece of ingenuity, clicked into place in his mind. A hybrid solution. A plan born of two opposite, godlike powers. It would cost him. The pain would be astronomical, but it was the only way. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his decision made. He lowered himself into a crouch, focusing his mind. He ignored 0 hour. This was for the storm. He reached for the raging furnace of one for all, pulling a fraction of that boundless energy and pouring it, not into his whole body, but directing it with every ounce of his concentration down into his legs. The power surged. It was an agony and an ecstasy, a feeling of being filled with pure lightning. Red, crackling energy enveloped his legs, and the pavement beneath his feet began to spiderweb and crack under the strain. He could feel his own bones groaning, protesting the influx of a power they were not meant to hold. He looked up at the robot's head, his target. Then he pushed. Boom! The world exploded in a blast of sound and force. He didn't just jump, he detonated. The asphalt beneath him shattered into a crater. He shot into the air like a green cannonball, a trail of smoke and displaced air in his wake. The moment he left the ground, a new, searing pain eclipsed the burning power of one for all. It was the sickening, wet, grinding crunch of his own bones shattering. Both of his legs, from the ankles to the femurs, were now a ruined mess of splintered bone and torn muscle, held together only by skin and fabric. The agony was so white-hot and absolute that it threatened to make him black out. But he couldn't. Not yet. He flew, a broken comet, soaring through the air. The wind roared past him. The ground, with the terrified Uraraka and the descending metal foot, receded below. His target, the robot's massive, impassive face, grew closer. He grit his teeth against the pain, tears streaming from his eyes. He had one more thing to do. He reached out with his right hand, the limbs still functional. He wasn't aiming for a punch. He just needed to make contact. His trajectory was perfect. He slammed into the robot's faceplate, his small body hitting the massive surface with a dull clang. His hand, palm flat, slapped against the cold metal right over its optical sensor. Now, he let go of one for all, letting the dying embers of its power fade. And in its place, he summoned the abyss. He pulled on 0 hour, not to stop, not to rewind, but to accelerate. He didn't try to affect the whole machine. He focused all his will, all the remaining energy he had, through the point of contact in his palm. He created a localized, hyper-focused field of temporal acceleration. He was going to make this single piece of metal experience centuries of decay in the span of a few seconds. Age. Rust. Decay. The backlash was instantaneous and unlike anything he had ever felt before. It wasn't a sharp pain like a time-stop's migraine. It was a deep, violating sickness. It felt as if he were being stretched thin across millennia, his own cells vibrating out of sync with reality. A wave of nausea so profound it felt like his soul was trying to exit his body washed over him. Black, vein-like lines erupted on his arm, racing up from his hand towards his shoulder, a visible sign of the temporal corruption. Blood poured from his nose and the corners of his eyes. But it was working. A low groan emanated from the robot's head, a sound of stressed, tortured metal. A shimmering, heat-haze aura appeared around Izuku's hand. The dark green paint on the robot's face began to bubble and flake away, not from heat, but from age. The flakes turned a dusty brown, then a deep, angry orange as rust bloomed with unnatural speed. The groaning intensified. The metal under his palm began to pit and corrode, holes appearing as if eaten by a phantom acid. Wires and servos visible beneath the armor frayed, turned brittle, and crumbled into metallic dust. The corrosion spread outwards from his hand in a rapidly expanding circle of decay. The entire head of the zero-pointer was turning to dust. It was a horrifying, silent spectacle of entropy on fast-forward. In the space of 3 seconds, the solid, multi-ton head of the machine disintegrated, crumbling away in a cascade of rust and rotten wiring, leaving only the neck joint exposed. Deprived of its brain, the Titan seized. Its descent stopped. It froze for a moment, then its massive body began to tilt backward, away from Uraraka, its balance completely gone. Izuku's job was done. And the cost came due. The last of his strength vanished. The temporal sickness overwhelmed him, and his consciousness dissolved into a vortex of black. His grip on the crumbling robot failed, and his broken, unconscious body began its long fall back to the earth. In the observer's room, a wall of monitors displayed feeds from every corner of the battle centers. A group of pro-heroes sat in the darkened room, their faces illuminated by the flickering screens. "That kid in Center B is tearing it up," Power Loader grunted, pointing to a screen showing Bakugo blasting a three-pointer to bits. "Incredible power and aggression. But his technique is sloppy," a tired voice drawled from a shadowed corner. Shota Aizawa, his eyes dry and red, didn't seem impressed. "All power, no finesse. He'll hit a wall eventually." Suddenly, every head in the room snapped towards the main, central screen, which was focused on the rampaging zero-pointer in Battle Center B. "Well, that's the cue for the smart ones to run," Midnight said with a smirk. Then they saw him. A tiny green blur, shooting upwards. "What the hell?" Cementos leaned forward, his blocky features etched with confusion. "Is he attacking it?" "That's suicidal." They watched, stunned, as Izuku's broken form slammed into the robot's head. And then they saw the effect. "What is that?" Aizawa sat up straight, his usual apathy gone, replaced by a sharp, analytical focus. Some kind of acid or decay quirk? No, look at the sensor readings, a cheerful, high-pitched voice squeaked. Principal Nizu, the hyper-intelligent animal, was staring at a data tablet, his beady black eyes wide with something between glee and terror. Power output from the subject is off the charts, but it's not thermal, kinetic, or chemical. It's something else. The temporal sensors are going haywire. On the screen, the robot's head was visibly disintegrating. He's not melting it, Aizawa breathed, his eyes wide. He's aging it. It's decaying. Rusting to dust in seconds. Nizu's tail twitched excitedly. The localized temporal field around his hand is showing a distortion factor of, oh my. It's as if that small section of reality was accelerated by several decades, perhaps even a century, in the span of 4.7 seconds. Astonishing! And utterly terrifying. They watched in stunned silence as the giant robot, decapitated by an impossible power, crashed harmlessly away from the trapped girl. Then they saw Izuku's unconscious body plummeting towards the ground. He's going to be paced. Power Loader yelled. Before any of them could even debate intervening, something happened on the screen. The girl, Uraraka, now free from the rubble, pushed herself up, slapped Izuku's falling form with her hand, and yelled, "Release!" His body was enveloped in a pink glow, his deadly descent slowing to a gentle, zero-gravity float just before he would have hit the pavement. Then she collapsed from the effort and her own injuries. Present Mick's voice, for once subdued, echoed from the speakers. Time's up. In the observation room, the silence was deafening. Recovery Girl, who had been watching from the back, finally spoke. Well, she said, pointing a syringe-like cane at the screen showing Izuku and Uraraka. That one saved that one. Regardless of his reckless quirk usage, the boy gets full marks for that. 60 rescue points. Nizu was still staring at his tablet, a manic grin spreading across his face. A quirk that controls the flow of time itself, he whispered to himself. Oh, the educational possibilities are simply delicious. Aizawa just stared at the screen, a grim expression on his face. The boy had broken his own body to use his power. He was reckless, illogical, and had a quirk that defied all known conventions. He was, Aizawa thought with a strange sense of foreboding, going to be a massive headache. Izuku woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the gentle, sweet taste of gummies in his mouth. He was in a pristine white bed. An old, tiny woman in a lab coat, Recovery Girl, was patting his hand. Ah, you're awake, dearie, she said kindly. Quite the performance you put on out there. My legs? Izuku asked, his voice hoarse. He tried to sit up and was surprised to find he could. He looked down. His legs were fine. A little sore but whole. I healed your bones, she explained. But you drained me dry. You won't be getting any more help from me today. Your injuries were peculiar. It wasn't just the broken bones. Your cells were agitated, out of sync. It took more effort than usual to knit you back together. You'd best be careful with that quirk of yours. The door opened, and All Might, in his skeletal form, entered. He gave Recovery Girl a nod and then turned to Izuku, a hologram projector in his hand. You passed, he said, his voice a mixture of overwhelming pride and deep-seated gravity. He clicked on the projector. A screen materialized in the air. Examinee, Izuku Midoriya. Villain points, 21. Rescue points, 60. Total, 81. Rank first. Izuku stared, his eyes wide with disbelief. First place. He had come in first place. He had beaten Kaken. He had done it. Your tactical use of your quirk to disable robots without destroying them earned you a respectable number of villain points, All Might explained. But your final act, incapacitating the zero-pointer to save young Uraraka, is what truly set you apart. That is the true essence of a hero. It earned you the highest rescue points score of the day. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes. He had done it. But young Midoriya, All Might's tone became serious. We need to talk about what you did. Localized time acceleration on that scale. The backlash could have killed you. It could have erased you from existence. You walked a razor's edge today. Izuku just nodded, looking down at his hands. He could still feel the phantom sickness, the feeling of his own existence fraying. He had the power to turn steel to dust. What would a power like that do to a person? He had his acceptance. He was going to UA. He was on his way to becoming a hero, but as he held the phantom weight of that acceptance in his hands, he understood that his journey was not just about saving others. It was about learning to control the godlike, monstrous power that slept within him, and hoping it wouldn't consume him first. The test was over, but the real trial had just begun. The first day at UA High felt less like a day of school and more like walking into the pages of a legend. The hallways were cavernous, the windows impossibly large, and every student Izuku passed radiated an aura of confidence and power. These were the elite, the chosen few, the next generation of heroes. And somehow, impossibly, he was one of them. He found Class 1A, the door comically oversized, and hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the handle. He was the top-ranked student of the entrance exam, a fact that still felt like a bizarre dream. Yet, the memory of shattered bones and the sickening feeling of temporal backlash were stark reminders of the reality and the cost of his power. He wasn't a powerhouse like Bakugo. He was a tactician with a double-edged, reality-warping sword. How would he ever fit in? Taking a deep breath, he slid the door open. He was immediately met with a familiar, tense scene. Bakugo was sitting with his feet propped up on his desk, and the serious, blue-haired boy from the exam, Tenya Ida, was chastising him for disrespecting school property. "We are the elite, chosen from the best of the best," Ida declared, his arms chopping the air with stiff precision. "To defile these sacred desks is an insult to our upperclassmen and the craftsmen who built them," Bakugo just sneered. "Sacred? They're desks. What junior high did you crawl out of, you four-eyed extra?" Ida recoiled as if struck. Extra? It was then that Ida noticed Izuku standing in the doorway. He immediately marched over, his hand outstretched. "Good morning. I am Tenya Ida, from Semi-Private Academy." "I know," Izuku stammered, shaking his hand. "I'm Izuku Midoriya. It's nice to meet you, Midoriya." Ida's eyes widened behind his glasses. "I must apologize for my behavior at the orientation. You correctly deduced the true nature of the practical exam, didn't you? While I was focused on the superficial villain points, you understood that there was a deeper test of character. I was completely blind to it. You are clearly my superior. I am humbled." He bowed a perfect 90 degrees. Izuku flailed his hands, completely flustered. "And no, not at all. I didn't think about it like that, Hey! I know that curly hair." He turned to see Ochako Uraraka, the girl who had saved him from his fall, beaming at him from the doorway. "You got in. Just like I hoped. That final move was incredible, decaying that huge robot's head into dust." "Wow." Izuku's face went crimson. Thanks. "And you saved me. Your quirk is amazing, making me float like that." "Oh, it was nothing," she said, a light blush on her cheeks. "Though I totally barfed afterwards." As they spoke, a new presence made itself known. A figure, cocooned in a yellow sleeping bag, lay on the floor behind the teacher's podium like a monstrous, exhausted caterpillar. "If you're here to make friends, you can pack up and leave." The voice was a dry, monotonous drawl that cut through the chatter like a knife. The figure slowly unzipped the bag and rose to its feet, revealing a man with tired, bloodshot eyes, a mess of black hair, and a capture weapon that looked like a bundle of gray scarves wrapped around his neck. He took a long, slow slurp from a juice pouch. "Welcome to UA's hero course," he said, his deadpan gaze sweeping across the stunned class. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down. "That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource. You lot aren't being rational enough." He tossed a gym uniform onto his desk. "I'm Shota Aizawa, your homeroom teacher. Put these on and meet me on the P grounds." Now, the locker room was a cacophony of nervous energy and boasts. Izuku changed quickly, trying to stay out of the way. He could feel Bakugo's eyes on him, a constant, burning pressure. The silence from his childhood rival was more unnerving than his usual explosive rage. It was a cold, calculating silence. On the P grounds, Aizawa looked just as bored and exhausted as he had in the classroom. "We're having a quirk apprehension test," he announced, his voice devoid of any enthusiasm. "A quirk test?" Uraraka asked. But what about the entrance ceremony? And orientation? UE isn't like other schools, Aizawa stated flatly. We teachers are allowed to run our classes as we see fit. You've been doing physical fitness tests without your quirks your whole lives. It's an irrational system. Today, you'll be using your quirks to push your limits. He tossed a softball to Bakugo. Bakugo. You got the highest score on the practical exam's villain points. What was your best softball throw in junior high? 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk, Aizawa instructed. Do whatever you need to. Just stay in the circle. Bakugo grinned, a feral, predatory expression. He wound up, and as his arm came forward, he unleashed a massive, concussive blast from his palm. Die! He screamed, the word carried on the shockwave. The ball shot into the sky like a missile, leaving a trail of smoke. Aizawa held up a small device. A number appeared on the screen. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in gasps and excited murmurs. We can use our quirks for real. This is gonna be fun. A red-haired, spiky-toothed boy exclaimed. Fun? Aizawa's voice dropped, and the temperature on the field seemed to plummet with it. A strange, menacing aura rolled off him. You think this is fun? You have 3 years to become heroes. You think it's all going to be games and fun? How utterly irrational. His lips twisted into a grim, joyless smile. All right. New rule. The student who comes in last place in total points will be judged to have 0 potential, and will be expelled immediately. Panic rippled through the class. Izuku's blood ran cold. Expelled? On the first day? This wasn't a test. This was a culling. Aizawa's gaze was like a physical weight. This is UA. Go beyond. Plus ultra. Show me it's not just an empty motto. The first test was the 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired with Ida. This was a test of raw, linear application of power. A straightforward problem. On your mark, get set. The starting pistol fired. Ida's engines roared to life, and he shot off the line like a rocket. Izuku, however, did something different. Just as the gun fired, he triggered a time blink. A single, razor-thin slice of a moment, 0.1 seconds long. Stop. The world went silent and gray. Ida was a frozen statue, a cloud of dust just beginning to kick up around his feet. In this silent sanctuary, Izuku's mind was perfectly calm. He analyzed his own posture, the angle of his body, the placement of his feet. He saw the tiny imperfections in his starting stance and, in the real world, his body shifted, correcting them with impossible speed and precision. Start. Reality crashed back in. To everyone else, including the electronic timer, it looked like he had the reaction time of a supercomputer. He burst from the blocks in a perfect, explosive start, leveraging every ounce of the physical strength he'd built over the last 10 months. He wasn't as fast as Ida's engines, not by a long shot, but that perfect start gave him an edge. Ida finished in 3.04 seconds. Izuku crossed the line at 5.58 seconds. It wasn't a heroic time, but for his build, it was exceptional, far better than he could have managed without 0 hours subtle boost. A faint throb started behind his eyes, the familiar price of admission. Next was the grip strength test. This was harder. He couldn't use his quirk directly to enhance his physical power. Instead, he employed a different tactic. As he squeezed the device, he used another micro-blink, this time to analyze the internal mechanism of the dynamometer. He saw the springs, the gears, the pressure plate. He couldn't make himself stronger, but he could ensure that 100% of the force he exerted was applied in the most optimal way possible, with no wasted energy. He scored 65 kilograms, again, not superhuman, but far better than his old, clumsy self could have managed. The standing long jump, the repeated side steps, he used the same technique for all of them. Tiny, fractional time stops to analyze, optimize, and perfect his movements. He was a ghost in the system, exploiting the gaps in reality to turn his average physicality into something ruthlessly efficient. He wasn't breaking records, but he was consistently scoring in the middle of the pack, staying safely out of last place. All the while, he felt Aizawa's eyes on him. The man's gaze was heavy, analytical. Izuku's name had been flagged. His exam file was a mess of contradictions, a supposedly clumsy student with a minor lag quirk who had performed feats of impossible precision and then unleashed a reality-defying power that had left the faculty baffled. Aizawa was watching him, trying to make sense of the paradox. The final test was the ball throw. This was the big one. This was where everyone showed off the raw, explosive potential of their quirks. Uraraka got an infinity score by making the ball weightless. The laser naval boy Oyama shot it with a beam but was crippled by a stomach ache after. Then it was Izuku's turn. He stepped into the circle, the soft ball feeling heavy and alien in his hand. Everyone was watching. He could feel their expectations. He was the kid who had destroyed the zero-pointer. They were expecting something spectacular. He took a deep breath. He couldn't use a 100% smash. It would break his arm and end his day, possibly his UA career. But All Might had given him a piece of advice just that morning. Clench your butt cheeks and scream smash in your heart. It was ridiculous, but the core idea was sound. Focus the power to a single point, a single instant. Don't let it flood your whole limb. He wound up, mimicking Bakugo's throw. He poured his focus into the tip of his index finger, picturing the raging inferno of one for all converging on that tiny point. The power surged, a familiar and terrifying feeling. Red veins of energy crawled up his arm, converging on his fingertip. He threw the ball. As it left his hand, he unleashed the power. A shockwave of force erupted from his finger. The ball became a white blur, screaming through the air with a sonic boom that cracked the air. The backlash was immediate and agonizing. A sharp, sickening crunch echoed in his arm, and a lance of pure agony shot up to his shoulder. His index finger was now a mangled, purple ruin, bent at an impossible angle. But as the ball flew, propelled by the raw power of One for All, Izuku did something else. It was an instinct, a gamble, a desperate push for every last advantage. In the split second the ball was still accelerating from the smash, he focused his other quirk, 0 hour, on it. Not a stop. An acceleration. He wrapped a microfield of accelerated time around the projectile for less than 1/10 of a second. Faster. To an outside observer, nothing seemed to change. But the ball, for that briefest of moments, experienced a slightly faster flow of time, granting it an extra burst of momentum that defied conventional physics. It was a tiny nudge, a cosmic cheat, but it would add precious meters to its flight. The effort of using both quirks in such quick succession, one of chaos and one of control, was immense. The throbbing in his head spiked violently, and a wave of nausea washed over him. The black, vein-like marks he'd seen during the exam flickered on his throwing arm for a split second before fading. Aizawa's device beeped. He held it up. 705.3 meters. A murmur went through the class. He had beaten Bakugo's score. By 1/10 of a meter. Izuku stumbled out of the circle, clutching his broken finger, sweat beading on his forehead. The pain was immense, but a grim smile touched his lips. He'd done it. He had controlled One for All, even if only for a moment, and he had used 0 hour to give it that final, imperceptible edge. He looked over at Bakugo. The explosive teen was staring at him, his face a mask of incandescent rage and utter disbelief. His knuckles were white where he gripped his shorts. It wasn't just that Izuku had beaten him. It was how. It was the impossible power, the sudden competence, the fact that the useless, glitchy Deku he had known his whole life was a complete and utter lie. Before Bakugo could explode, however, another voice cut through the tension. "Let me see that finger." Aizawa was suddenly in front of him, his expression unreadable. He took Izuku's arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and examined the shattered digit. Izuku flinched, but then something strange happened. Aizawa's eyes flared a bright, burning red. His messy black hair lifted around his head, as if defying gravity. The capture weapon around his neck writhed like a nest of snakes, and the roaring inferno of One for All inside Izuku, the residual energy that was still thrumming painfully through his body, simply vanished. It was gone. Snuffed out like a candle. What? Izuku gasped. The absence of the power was a physical shock, leaving a cold, empty feeling in its place. "My quirk is erasure," Aizawa said, his voice a low growl. "I can nullify the quirks of anyone I'm looking at. From your file, I was expecting some kind of strength enhancement, or decay quirk. And yet, he stared intently at Izuku, his red gaze unwavering. And he felt it. Erasure was a perfect counter to emitter-type quirks like One for All. But it wasn't working completely on Izuku. There was a resistance, a subtle, temporal drag that made his eyes ache and burn far more than usual. He could feel something else there, a deeper, more fundamental power that his quirk couldn't fully grasp or negate. Izuku, without the buffer of One for All, felt the full, unfiltered presence of 0 Hour rise to the surface. Under Aizawa's scrutinizing gaze, his body gave a small, involuntary glitch. His hand seemed to stutter in Aizawa's grip, phasing for a nanosecond. Aizawa's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He felt that. It wasn't a biological function he could erase. It felt like a tremor in the fabric of reality itself. A hiccup in the laws of physics. Your quirk isn't just power, Aizawa stated, his voice low and dangerous. There's something else. Something different. He finally blinked, and his hair fell back into place. The overwhelming presence of One for All flooded back into Izuku's system, making him gasp. Aizawa wrapped Izuku's broken finger in a length of his capture weapon, the material surprisingly strong and supportive, creating a makeshift splint. You have immense potential, Midoriya, but you're a glass cannon. You're reckless and irrational. One more stunt that leaves you this incapacitated, and you'll find yourself out of my class, potential or not. Go see Recovery Girl. He turned away, leaving Izuku reeling from the encounter. Aizawa knew. He didn't know what it was, but he knew there was more to his quirk than what was on paper. The secret was already beginning to fray at the edges. As the last student finished the test, Aizawa displayed the final results on a holographic screen. Izuku, thanks to his consistent, middle-of-the-road scores and his spectacular ball throw, had landed comfortably in the top half of the class. At the very bottom was a short, purple-haired boy named Minoru Mineta. The boy began to cry, convinced he was about to be expelled. By the way, Aizawa said, his back to the class, a sly, almost cruel grin on his face. The expulsion thing was a lie. The entire class, save for a knowing girl with a black ponytail, screamed in shock. It was a logical deception, Aizawa explained, his grin fading back into his usual deadpan expression. A rational falsehood to push you all to your absolute limits. As the class began to file back towards the locker rooms, relieved and exhausted, a figure blocked Izuku's path. It was Bakugo. He was trembling, not with fear, but with a rage so profound it seemed to vibrate the air around him. Smoke was curling from his clenched fists. Deku, he snarled, his voice a low, guttural growl. Keikaken? Izuku stammered, taking an involuntary step back. Don't you kaken me, Bakugo seethed, stepping forward, his red eyes boring into Izuku's. That little performance back there. The exam. The sludge villain. What the hell is going on? He jabbed a finger at Izuku's chest. You've been lying to me. Your whole life. That useless, clumsy, glitchy quirk, that was all a lie, wasn't it? You were hiding this. Hiding this thing, he gestured vaguely, unable to put words to the impossible feats he had witnessed. That throw, that wasn't just strength. And at the exam, you didn't just move fast. You were there, and then you were somewhere else. I was inside that sludge monster. I saw it. The world, it stopped. Izuku's heart froze. He had been so focused on All Might and the pro-heroes that he had forgotten. The one other person who had been at the epicenter of 0 Hour's awakening was Bakugo. What are you? Bakugo demanded, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and a deep, unsettling confusion. The foundation of his world, a world where he was the strongest and Deku was a worthless pebble, had been shattered. Now, he was faced with a Deku who was not only powerful, but whose power was incomprehensible, alien. It was a power that didn't follow the rules. Izuku didn't know what to say. He couldn't tell him the truth. Not about One for All. Not about 0 Hour. The secrets were too heavy, too dangerous. You think you're better than me now? Bakugo shoved him, the anger finally boiling over. You think you can look down on me with this freaky new power you pulled out of your ass? No! It's not like that, Kaken. Izuku protested, stumbling back. Stop calling me that! Bakugo roared, a small explosion popping from his palm. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Deku, but I'm going to figure it out. And I'm going to beat you. I'm going to crush you so completely that whatever this power is, you'll be too scared to ever use it again. You're not a hero. You're a liar. A freak. With that, he turned and stormed off, leaving Izuku standing alone on the field, his broken finger throbbing in time with the ache in his head. The physical tests were over, but he had just been initiated into a new, more dangerous conflict. His rivalry with Bakugo was no longer about childish superiority. It was now laced with suspicion, fear, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the forces at play. He had passed Aizawa's test and survived his own quirks. But he had also gained the scrutiny of his teacher, and the obsessive, fearful ire of his rival. The weight of his secrets was growing heavier with every passing hour. He was no longer just Glitchku, the clumsy, useless dreamer. He was Izuku Midoriya, wielder of 0 Hour and One for All, and his life had just become infinitely more complicated. The days that followed the quirk apprehension test settled into a semblance of a routine, albeit a routine punctuated by the extraordinary. Mornings were filled with standard academic subjects like English, taught with manic energy by President Mike, and modern hero art history, narrated with surprising passion by midnight. Afternoons were the main event, hero basic training. Their first proper hero class was a trial by fire. All Might, in all his Gilded Age glory, burst into the classroom to announce their first exercise, the battle trial. They donned their newly made hero costumes, Izuku's a simple green jumpsuit with a respirator mask and long, floppy ears reminiscent of his idol's haircut, and were pitted against each other in 2-on-2, hero versus villain indoor battles. Izuku was paired with Uraraka, and their opponents were, by a cruel twist of fate, Bakugo and Ida. The confrontation was inevitable. The battle was brutal, a chaotic mix of strategy and raw emotion. Bakugo, consumed by a singular, obsessive rage, ignored the objective, a nuclear weapon prop, and hunted Izuku with murderous intent. He was a force of nature, his explosions tearing apart the building as he screamed his frustrations into the echoing hallways. You've been laughing at me behind my back all these years, haven't you, you damned nerd? He roared, unleashing a massive explosion that forced Izuku to use a fractional time blink just to dodge the worst of the blast. Izuku's strategy was one of pure survival and analysis. He couldn't afford to fight Bakugo head-on. The risk of losing control of One for All was too great, and the backlash from using 0 Hour in a prolonged, high-stress fight was a looming threat. Instead, he used his powers with the subtlety of a surgeon. He used microstops to anticipate Bakugo's trajectory, to see the tells in his body language a split second before he moved. He used the brief pauses to analyze the structural integrity of the floor, the placement of the support pillars, the angles of ricochet. He was a ghost, always one step ahead, a fact that only infuriated Bakugo further. The fight culminated in a desperate, final clash. Bakugo unleashed his ultimate move, pulling the pin on his grenade-like gauntlets to focus a building-shattering explosion down the hallway. Izuku, knowing he couldn't dodge it, was forced to counter. He channeled One for All into an upward smash, punching the ceiling. The raw power, even directed away from his opponent, shattered every bone in his arm. But the resulting shockwave tore through the floors above, creating the diversion Uraraka needed to secure the weapon. Izuku and Uraraka won the trial, but Izuku was left a broken, unconscious mess. His victory, however, did not go unnoticed. While his classmates saw a reckless, self-destructive quirk, there was one observer who saw something far more profound. A few days later, after another painful session with Recovery Girl, Izuku was summoned from his classroom. The messenger was a teacher he didn't recognize, and the destination was not the infirmary or the counselor's office. It was the highest, most secure office in the entire school, the office of the principal. The room was a stunning panorama of the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides. The desk was large and ornate, and sitting behind it, in a chair far too large for him, was a small, white creature that was either a bear, a dog, or a mouse. He wore a crisp suit and had a scar over his right eye. This was Principal Nizu, the hyper-intelligent animal whose quirk, high spec, made his intelligence surpass that of any human. Ah, Midoriya-kun. Please come in. Have a seat. Tea? Nisa asked, his voice a cheerful, high-pitched tenor that was slightly at odds with the unnerving intelligence gleaming in his black, beady eyes. He gestured to a plush armchair. And no thank you, sir, Izuku stammered, his heart pounding. Being called to the principal's office was terrifying under normal circumstances. Being summoned by a creature who could probably calculate the heat-death of the universe in his head was on another level entirely. No need to be so nervous, Nisa said, pouring himself a cup. You are not in any trouble. Quite the contrary. I have been reviewing the data from your entrance exam and the battle trial with great interest. A truly fascinating and problematic quirk you possess. He took a sip of tea, his eyes twinkling. The official record, submitted by a rather hasty diagnosis from your childhood, lists your quirk as synaptic lag. Aizawa-kun's report from the apprehension test suggests a powerful, but dangerously unstable, strength enhancement quirk. The censored data from the exam, however, that tells a very, very different story. A story of localized temporal acceleration. A story of reality being edited. Izuku's blood ran cold. Nisa knew. Of course he knew. Nothing got past him. I will not ask you to confirm or deny my hypothesis, Nisa continued, setting his cup down. The nature of one's quirk can be a deeply personal matter. However, a power of this magnitude cannot be left unguided. To send you into the field with a quirk that can potentially alter causality without proper training would not just be irresponsible, it would be catastrophically negligent. It would be like handing a toddler a thermonuclear device and hoping for the best. He hopped down from his chair and waddled over to a large digital whiteboard. With a few taps, he brought up a complex series of diagrams and equations that made Izuku's head spin. So, the principal said, a manic grin spreading across his face, consider this your first private lesson. Welcome to Applied Heroics 404, an introduction to theoretical temporal mechanics and paradoxical ethics. Izuku stared, dumbfounded. This wasn't a disciplinary meeting. This was an intervention. For the next 2 hours, Nisa gave Izuku a crash course in concepts that most physicists spent their entire lives trying to comprehend. He explained the Novikov self-consistency principle, the grandfather paradox, the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. He sketched out diagrams of world lines, light cones, and the theoretical foam of spacetime. He spoke of the butterfly effect not as a metaphor, but as a terrifyingly literal law of causality. Every action creates a reaction, Nisa explained, pacing back and forth. But an action that manipulates time does not just create a reaction. It creates a cascade of new actions and reactions that ripple both forwards and backwards along the timeline. You are not just throwing a stone into a pond, Midoriya-kun. You are changing the chemical composition of the water itself. He brought up the footage from the entrance exam. Here, he said, pointing to the moment Uraraka was trapped. You saved her by destroying the zero-pointer. A noble, heroic act. But let us play a game of what if. What if a piece of that falling, decayed robot, no larger than a pebble, struck the pavement at a precise angle, kicking up a shard of asphalt that flew into the tire of a passing bus 3 blocks away? The bus blows a tire, swerves, and crashes. 10 people are injured too critically. You saved 1 life, but your actions inadvertently endangered a dozen others. Izuku felt a wave of nausea. He had never, ever considered that. His focus had been so narrow, so immediate. Save the person in front of him. That was what a hero did. This is the fundamental burden of your power, Nisa said, his cheerful demeanor fading into something far more serious. Most heroes operate within the established laws of physics. They are actors on the stage. You, Midoriya-kun, have the potential to rewrite the play, burn down the theater, and build a new one in its place. The question you must always ask yourself is not can I change this, but should I? He dismissed the whiteboard and turned to face Izuku directly. All Might has informed me of the other aspect of your abilities, and the physical toll it takes. He is training your body to be a proper vessel. I will train your mind to be a responsible pilot. Your homework, he said, tapping a few buttons on his desk, sending a file to Izuku's student datapad, is to read these 3 textbooks on quantum chromodynamics, and write me a 5,000-word essay on the ethical implications of reversing entropy in a closed system. Class dismissed. Izuku stumbled out of the office, his brain feeling like it had been put through a blender. He felt small, insignificant, and terrified. His quirk wasn't a tool. It was a cosmic responsibility he was in no way prepared to handle. His next private lesson was not in an office, but in a secure, reinforced training facility deep beneath UA, known simply as Vault Gamma. It was a stark, windowless room, the walls lined with sensors and high-speed cameras. All Might, in his skeletal form, was there, along with Principal Nizu, who was perched on a control console. "Welcome, young Midoriya," All Might said, his voice echoing in the sterile chamber. "Today's lesson is a practical one. Nizu and I agree that while we must be cautious, we cannot fully understand the limits and consequences of your quirk without carefully controlled experimentation." On a pedestal in the center of the room sat a delicate, porcelain vase, painted with intricate blue flowers. "The goal is simple," Nizu's voice chirped from a speaker. "All Might will break the vase. You will then attempt to use your quirk to rewind its personal timeline and restore it to its unbroken state. We will be monitoring the temporal displacement, energy expenditure, and any resulting paradoxical feedback." "Paradoxical feedback?" Izuku asked, his stomach tightening into a knot. "The universe does not appreciate being contradicted," Nizu explained cheerfully. "We theorize there may be a corrective mechanism. A backlash beyond the mere physical." All Might gave Izuku a reassuring, if somewhat grim, nod. Then, with a casual flick of his finger, he sent a minuscule shockwave of power towards the pedestal. The vase exploded into 1,000 tiny, glittering shards. Izuku took a deep breath. This was the first time he had attempted to use the rewind function since that nauseating experience with the tire at the beach. He knew the cost would be high. He stepped forward, extending his hand, not towards the broken pieces, but towards the empty space where the vase had been. He closed his eyes, filtering out all distractions. He focused on the memory of the vase, its shape, its weight, the pattern of the flowers. He reached out with 0 hour, not with the cold command to stop or the entropic push to accelerate, but with a gentle, wheedling plea to undo, rewind. The feeling was instantly, violently wrong. A grinding, tearing sensation ripped through his perception of reality. The air grew thick and heavy, and a high-pitched whine, like 1,000 tuning forks, screamed in his ears. The physical backlash was immediate. A stabbing pain erupted in his gut, and his vision swam with black spots. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was in his mind. As the shards of porcelain on the floor began to tremble and lift into the air, tracing their paths in reverse, his mind was flooded with a torrent of horrific, phantom sensations. He felt a sharp, piercing pain in his left eye. He saw, for a split second, a vision through that eye, a classroom, a chemistry experiment gone wrong, a shard of glass flying. No, not glass, porcelain, flying across the room and embedding itself in the eye of a student he didn't recognize. He felt the phantom sensation of the girl's scream, the hot gush of blood, the blinding, permanent darkness. He felt a searing pain in his hand. Another vision, a janitor, sweeping up the mess later that day, one of the larger shards slicing his palm open, the cut becoming infected, leading to a week of agonizing sickness. He felt the grief of the vase's creator, an old woman who had poured her heart into this one piece, a gift for her grandchild, and the sorrow that would have come from hearing of its destruction. It was a psychic assault. A barrage of pain, suffering, and sorrow from a timeline he was actively erasing. The universe was showing him the consequences of the event he was undoing. It was forcing him to experience the story he was ripping out of the book. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony, and fell to his knees, clutching his head. On the pedestal, the vase shimmered and reformed, becoming whole again, not a single crack on its surface. "Midoriya-kun!" Nizu's voice was sharp with alarm. "Young Midoriya!" All Might was at his side in an instant, helping him up. Izuku was pale, trembling, and covered in a cold sweat. I felt it," Izuku gasped, his breath hitching in sobs. The people who would have been hurt. A girl, her eye, a janitor, his hand. I felt them. I felt their pain." All Might and Nizu exchanged a look of grim understanding. Their theory had been correct, and the reality was more terrible than they had imagined. "The paradox pain," Nizu said, his voice soft and devoid of its usual cheer. It seems that is the name for it. Your quirk does not just demand a physical toll. It demands an emotional and psychological one. To change what was, you must bear the weight of what would have been. You must carry the ghosts of the timeline you erase. Izuku stared at the perfectly whole vase, and he felt nothing but revulsion. He had fixed it. He had succeeded. But he was now haunted by the pain of a reality that never happened. He had saved these phantoms from their suffering, but their agony had become a part of him, a scar on his soul. The moral dilemma Nisa had spoken of was no longer a theoretical exercise. It was a visceral, painful reality. To save someone by rewinding time, to undo a death, would mean experiencing that death himself. He would have to feel the life fade, the pain, the fear, and carry that phantom trauma with him forever. Could he do that? Could he endure the spiritual agony of shouldering the world's erased tragedies? What if he saved one person, but the new timeline led to the deaths of 10 others? Would he be forced to feel all 10 of those deaths? The thought was paralyzing. The power to be the ultimate savior came with the potential for the ultimate suffering. His quirk was not a gift. It was a curse dressed in the robes of a god. That night, Izuku couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, the quantum physics textbooks Nisa had assigned lying open but unread. He stared at his own reflection in the dark window. He saw the face of a boy who had dreamed of saving people with a smile, just like All Might. But the reflection that stared back seemed older, his eyes shadowed with a burden no hero should have to carry. He thought about the future. He thought about the villains he would face, the lives that would hang in the balance. The temptation to just fix it, to rewind a fatal mistake, would always be there. But now he knew the cost. It wasn't just a nosebleed or a headache. It was a piece of his own soul. His datapad pinged. It was a message from an encrypted, untraceable number. From All Might. I know today was difficult, young Midoriya. Nizu and I have discussed it. We will not be conducting any more experiments with temporal reversal. It is too dangerous, and the cost is too high. Your power must be one of creation, not erasure. You must protect the present and build a better future. Do not dwell on the ghosts of the past, especially the ones you unmake. You are strong. You are a hero. Do not let this burden break you. I am here for you. The message helped, a small light in a vast darkness. But Izuku knew this was a battle he would ultimately have to fight alone, in the silent, frozen moments between seconds, where the ghosts of what might have been would be waiting for him. He closed his eyes, the phantom pain in his eye and hand still a faint, ghostly echo in his nerves, and for the first time, he was truly, deeply afraid of the power that lived inside him.